All right, I'm Matt Lange, and today we are deconstructing my track, Quiet Symphony. Quiet Symphony is a kind of odd track because it really uses two very different genres and just jams them together. And those two genres are very much techno and like warehouse dark techno. And then the other side of it is folk. And the irony is that originally when I was actually doing this track, I was a little worried it might be a little too like Avicii-esque, because he tried to do that kind of thing, and it was really cringy in my opinion when he did. Some people loved it, wasn't for me. So my worry, of course, was when I did this, it was going to kind of fall into that same ballpark, and fortunately I think it didn't. But the entire song, it was all written around this acoustic guitar motif. I'll show you real quick, but this guitar is tuned to DAD-GAD, which it would be D-A-D-G-A-C, or G-A-D, I'm sorry, but a whole step down, so the low note is C. So I think that would be like C-G-C-F-A-D. But the whole thing is based on this little motif. So it's just that kind of stuff. And it was actually heavily influenced by a song by Ben Howard called In Dreams. He plays that in D and not C, but that's more like a... So it's a similar picking pattern, and learning, or almost actually the same picking pattern, go in the hole, get in the flask. Little Nicky, anyone? But anyway, so that is what the entire song was based on originally. And let's take a look into this Pro Tools session, which is kind of massive. And we're gonna break down how it all gets put together, combining like warehouse techno with a folk song. Here we go. All right, so this is the Pro Tools session for Quiet Symphony. And it is not little at all. It is long. It's 116 channels. And I mean, there are a lot of reasons for this. Of course, it's just a lot of instruments. It's everything from like, you know, full vocals, and the vocals take up 30 channels, a lot of drums, a ton of guitars, like all this stuff. This is all just effects right here. Orange is bass. And then there are actual strings right here. So, and these are my cello. None of this was faked. There are no sample library strings here. This is entirely played. I have a cello back there, and I played it myself. So this track is also really special to me in that way, because it really is, it's very organic. It's completely played. So let's take a look at these guitars, because we started there. So the song opens up with that riff like we were talking about. And those guitars are very filtered right there. If we take a look at the EQ, it's just heavily, heavily bandpassed. And hang on, what is playing? There we go. So without the EQ, so I like the bandpass intro kind of sound. And we also introduced like these little harmonics. And those also, those came from an electric guitar. There's these others as well. So it's all atmospheric stuff. And another guitar gets layered in there, and this is kind of a different kind of motif. It's a reversed guitar, and it gets faded in, but it sounds like this. So when you have that with that other acoustic, it's a very cool sound. So that is the intro. There are also some drums at this point. And this is actually a bounce of my main drum bus that I then affected. But it's very, very low passed, as you can see. And then that low pass filter opens up. And at that point, then we get these like opened up drums where the filter's off, and this is actually like the main drum tracks. But the kick is very high passed. You can visually even see that. Like, look how short that is compared to, you know, this beefy baby right there of a kick. So it's basically the same thing that we later have, but everything's high passed. So you kind of have like these tom sub hits, and then this, of course, which is just this like rumble atmosphere that you'll later hear better, and a couple hi-hats. This is originally from a slate hat, but you can see I cut it really, really, really tightly. That's obviously not how a live drum sounds at all. So that's edited. But that is basically everything for the intro. And now, ultimately, so when we get to the main groove and the verse comes in right here too, the guitars are very layered up now. So originally, we would have just this one part. But I triple tracked it actually. So there are 3 takes of it. There's one dead center, and then I have these other 2 left and right. And they all have the same EQ setting, which is just like a low pass or a low cut. And then we're dipping out a little bit of like those low mids right there. But you layer up all the guitars together. I'm gonna take off the reverb that they're going through. And now they sound really big and wide. Well, there is more than one, I see what's going on here. So they're actually going to different buses. So here is no reverb. The other thing that's interesting about this is that main one up here, this just pedals on that C the whole time. Meanwhile, these ones, these actually follow the chord progression. And it doesn't clash because, I mean, it's going to the 3rd and the 4th. So that's just going to make a nice chord with these underneath it. So I just think that's really cool. But that's how those are all done. And then they're both going through independent acoustic buses. But reverb-wise, there's a black hole. And I actually have this directly on the channel as opposed to putting it on a send. And I don't have a reason for why I did that. I just did that. So once we have all that stuff going, then there also is a live bass. And bass guitar sounds like this. So with the guitars, so that's what's basically going on there. Now let's take a look at what the drums are doing here. And this is where you really start to see, you know, the real dichotomy, you know, between, you know, these two sides. I mean, if anything, this track is truly like the most representative of the album titled Dichotomy, without a doubt. So this is our drum track. And this is not the full, like we don't have everything going on, but this is, you know, most of it. So that's very techno. You know what? Let's just go actually to the full-on drums. They happen later over here, but then we can just break apart everything. So that's very not folk. That's very, very techno. And let's just talk about what's going on here. So first, I've got my kicks. It's a nice beefy kick. Came out of an Electron machine drum. It says MD kick, so that's how I know. And the other thing that you can see, like the kick is basically cut to be almost exactly, it's just shy of an eighth note. And I often do that just because then if I'm gonna have some kind of like bass that hits on the upbeat, I just want there to be no kick when I have that upbeat bass. And in particular, once we add this sub, which as you can see, does indeed hit on that upbeat, I don't want there to be any clashing. So once we factor in this kick and the sub together, and the sub also came out of the machine drum, so it's, you know, and they were pretty much made similarly. So they're really related, and which is good for just sonic cohesion. And there's no sidechain compression. Instead, what you can see I did here is I just did the fades in the audio itself. And it doesn't happen right there because I figured it sounded fine. But on where the actual drum, where the actual kick hits, there's a fade right there. And this creates that kind of like pummeling rhythm that is like, you know, this like undercurrent of the whole track. And then the other thing underneath it is this like atmosphere stuff, which is really just low-end garbage, to be honest. Without anything going on, I believe that should be cut to the sixth. Yeah, so it is synced to tempo, but it's really, because there is a transient right there, and you can see that's exactly the 16th note where it hits, but that fourth 16th note, but it's just low-end garbage. So without any of the processing, it sounds like this. So actually that would be cool in its own right if we just like, say, took this stuff. Right? We're in techno. But the first thing, yeah, that's a lot of EQ. It's actually kind of stupid what's going on there. The colors are nice though. But that makes that, you know, gnarly sound like this, which is really pretty much the basis of everything. But then we have this FabFilter Pro MB, and this is clever. I forgot about this. So this is getting the low end is just the sub itself is getting sidechained, but it's not getting sidechained to the kick. The kick's coming out of bus 69. This is getting sidechained to this just sub hits, and it's not sub hits that follow the exact sub pattern. It's a slightly different pattern. But these, like, I'm just gonna drag this down, but this is what's actually triggering the side chain for the rumble. So that's pretty cool. And then I just have this, what is it, the Brainworks V3, digital V3, and I'm just using it to mono the sub. So anything underneath 91 is getting monoed, which is helpful because this is like a whole mess of sub. And then there's lastly an EQ, and I must throw this on at the end just to like shave off a little bit more of the low end. So all those together create my, like, that's the sub motion underneath everything driving this track. Next, then we've got, you know, some like basic hi-hats. Nothing crazy. You know, there's a little bit of reverb on them. They're getting high passed, of course, and there's a lot of EQ on it because without the EQ, they sound like this. I like hi-hats that sound more like this. So that's personal taste, and I just wanted to take out, you know, like some of this like mid-range squeakiness. It's just painful pitchy, and add some high end, and I just love high end in general. It's what I do. So that's what's going on there, and it's also going there. It's getting sent to a drum reverb, and that drum reverb is right here, and it's just this 2C ether without it, with. And it's short. It's only a second. And then also on the reverb, you can see I took out like all of the low end. So I don't want there to be any low end because it's going to a hi-hat. That's stupid. So that is that. And then there is more noise. This is kind of functioning as an open hi-hat, if you will. And that would have been the same kind of thing I mentioned when I was talking about rim shot, where basically I just printed a reverb directly onto a hi-hat and then did audio fades. And that's how that would have been made. And then we get a clap. This comes also from machine drum. With the EQ, it's just taking out some low end and like a little bit of low mids. Just cleaning it up. And then that also gets layered with this other sound, which is just distorted schmutz. I don't really know exactly what the hell it was originally. Same kind of EQ, and then it's getting some additional EQ from the Slate API, and like the high end on this EQ is fantastic. So, and it's taking out the low end. So without this, with it. So that's what that's doing. And then we also have this like delayed clap loop. I don't know where that came from, to be honest. I mean, it came from a clap. It might have gone through like a delay pedal or something like that. That would make sense to me. Maybe I did it in the box. I have no idea. But there is a slight LFO tool on it, just doing, you know, your sidechain pump. And then this, which is doing a lot. So without the EQ. So that just brings it up in the mix, gives it some presence. And then we have these like little open hats, and they're all grouped together. But if we take the groups off, it's these three things. Tiny little clicks. Different tiny little click layered in. And if we look closely, that's what there's actually going on. And then that hat. And then we have these 16th notes. And who knows where that came from? I mean, it could have come from modular. I mean, it's mostly noise. So once you add all the drums up together, though, our super techno drums, you get this. And I just have these like little bits of percussion too, like these things you heard. Yeah, that came from modular, and it's just then getting through this this other reverb I used with the 2C ether and going through the tunnel space. But short reverbs for this stuff always. I don't really want it to be, you know, cavernous. I just want it to be just slightly atmospheric. And similar thing here with this percussion as well. It's just atmospheric noise. There's nothing, and I just arranged it, you know, to be rhythmically appropriate to also kind of give it that kind of just syncopation. So that is all the drums. And I mean, those basically, you know, they run through the entire track. So let's go back to now the second section. And we're going to have to get to the vocals eventually, but here we get like the Reese added in, the low bass. We also then get the additional guitars. So this was our bass guitar. And this happens after the first verse. So like there's like a groovier section, and now like the sub kicks in to make this part all feel that much heavier. So for instance, here is the Reese that comes in. right? And on the channel itself, it's very high passed, or very low passed, I'm sorry, but there is some high passing going on at 57, so it's not going all the way down, and that's really because there's all that sub coming out of those the drums. So without the filter and the EQ, it sounds like this. With it. So it just controls it, it tames it a bit, but it still has all the low end, which is huge. So when you hear that in the context of the track, it makes everything sound bigger.
Fragile beauty undiscovered, except for those she takes as lovers. Will she thaw my heart inside her own?
Without the race, with it. So the Reese adds a ton, and it's wide, but similar to what I did above, I'm just using a different Brainworks plugin arbitrarily, but I'm monoing everything underneath basically 120. So that just means there's not going to be any like weird stereo phasey stuff coming out of that Reese, which is a big deal. And then I also then have these like bass robotic sounds. That came from a Noise Engineering Ataraxic Terratas, which is a module by Noise Engineering, of course. Without the processing, sounds like this. It sounds transformery, you know? It's cool. There's some EQ, just taking at low end, and then there's another one of these reverbs. This time it's the B2 from 2C Audio. B2, 2C, it's very, very on the nose. But again, short reverb just gives it that kind of like cavernous atmosphere. Sounds cool. And we also get these like stereo low blasts here, and this came from the cello originally too. That's a lie, that did not come from a cello. That totally came from a synth. If we take this fade off, maybe it'll actually tell us what it actually sounded like originally. Oh, no, that did come from a cello. But that's what's happened. Okay, so I've got some automation on the EQs, and that makes it sound synthy. But that indeed came from the cello, but probably distorted, pitched down an octave. I mean, cellos are awesome. So that is, that's what's going on there. And then we also, what happens? Then we got this little break. This is a fun moment. I'm gonna play everything for this. So everything's really big and wide leading up to this moment.
How she has crawled into my soul.
So now everything here is dead mono. The only guitar is this. It's bandpassed too. There should be another bandpass because there's no high end going on here. That just might be the sound that gets, oh, it's printed. I see, okay. So there's a bandpass printed into this thing. But, and then the vocal, is just only one vocal going straight down the middle. But when we get to then this bar right here, suddenly gets really wide and the filters open up. The guitars are triple tracked again. The vocals are certainly multi-tracked, triple maybe? Triple, okay. So check this out. Really nice and small mono to super wide.
How she has crawled into my soul. And in my heart she bore a hole that's now her home.
Wow.
How did I always sail alone? And on this tragic earth the cynic found his tempo.
All right. So now there are more guitars. And what are these? They're double tracked left and right. They sound like this. So they're so pretty. But once you put them in with the other guitars, you get this. It's beautiful. And there's some additional high guitars here, which are these. So that's a variation. Let's layer those in together. And then we have the bass carrying the motion of the chord progression. It's so beautiful. It's like really, really beautiful. And then we had those reverse guitars. Those get layered in the whole time, as do these harmonics. So it's always like these little like guitar layers always getting layered in there. So let's also talk about the cellos, because they really, I mean, they're kind of everywhere, but they, in this moment, they really take on, you know, a significant melody. So this is the cello. And there's a second phrase. And that also, there's like a call and response with a similar melody that's played on guitar with an ebow. So you'll get the cello, then you'll get the ebow guitar. So this carries the melody, and let's play this stuff with all the guitars and the harmonics and everything, because I mean, the orchestration really is, it's really gorgeous. And there are also some like staccato, just stuttery cellos. And those are just, again, like providing this like organic atmosphere. Again, it's all played. There's no sample library here. And it's just going, all this stuff, it's all, they're going to two different string buses and these eighth note cello buses. These, aside from, there's some EQ taking out the low end, some compression from the Empirical Labs Arouser, but not a ton. A multi-band compressor, and that is getting keyed to bus 71, which means that it's probably coming from a vocal, because that means there was something clogging up this area, and I wanted that side chain to kind of even that out. So that's probably bus 71. If we go all the way up, it wouldn't be, that's bus 70. There's a lot of cross busing here. But 71, or it actually might have come from chorus bus 71. Okay, so the chorus vocal, which happens right here, the chorus vocal is triggering the sidechain the compression on this band of those eighth note strings, which means when I heard the vocals not hitting at the same time, I decided, okay, like there's something painful in this frequency, and I'm just going to use the vocal to then duck down that frequency in the eighth note cellos. which is a really hip trick, and it really helps clean up mixes when you have everything kind of like reacting off each other. And it keeps it very lively while still being full. Like you don't have to do all these EQ cuts that can kind of like make things sound sterile. Like if everything's reactive, then it's really powerful what you can do. So there's a lot of that. This is going through a string bus. It's just going through an SSL, a UAD SSL channel strip, and mostly for like the high pass filter, but then just like a touch of EQ here and there, but nothing crazy. And that goes through another compressor, which is the Slate, basically SSL bus comp, and through this B2 reverb, which isn't on a bus, and I don't know why. Just didn't. And then these other strings, they're getting a different set of processing, but they too are also getting keyed or sidechained. I say keyed because I'm old school in Pro Tools, but and there's a key right there. But they're getting sidechained off of that chorus vocal as well. And then, yeah, you've got some compression, also some EQ, taking out the low end. And this is probably just here for automation. Yes, I'm using this to do gain automation, so I didn't have to do it on the, I'm already doing it with volume trim. So this gave me another layer of volume automation by using this plugin. And yeah, then we've got that multi-band compressor. And the bus this goes to is similar. Once again, same SSL, same comp right there, same EQ or same reverb, but then it goes through a filter, which will be used for automation. So that is, that's what's going on with those strings. And while we're at the cellos, let's just talk a little bit more about these other cellos. So here are the cello lows and the cello mel harm. So those are just following the chord progression. The mel harm is just basically playing, I believe that would be the 9, so a D. But these they're used to thicken everything else out, and they sound really cool. In the bridge, they get used for, to kind of like really accentuate the chord progression change. And then there's cello fifths, so I'm playing a fifth above the root note. And that's just like scraping the bow up close to the bridge so you can make it squeal. Such a cool sound. And that's layered with like the staccato eighth notes. And the guitars as well as bass and everything. It's a really cool sound. I am, very proud of this. So that's basically all the harmonic instrumentation parts in the drums, but let's talk about the vocals, because this is obviously a song, and the vocals are the most important thing of the song, one could argue, or it could also be your least favorite thing. Doesn't matter, it's not your song, it's mine. So these are all the vocals, and they were edited and recorded in a separate tracking session. So what we have here is already they've already been tuned, and I've corrected the timing where I need to, especially with doing lots of stacks and stuff like that, and harmonies and doubles. I vocal line a lot of stuff, so that vocal line's a cool plugin if you're doing a lot of vocal processing. If you don't know what it is, check it out. Like the time it saves you, insane. But so by the time we got to this point, everything was already edited, but there wasn't any processing yet on, there might have been slight, but you can see like there is some, you know, rounding off on the vocals here. So there might have been a little bit of compression, but also they're tracked through a Neve 1073, a heritage Neve 1073. And that preamp in general tends to saturate things a little bit and kind of squares them off. So there is some compression on here, but a lot of the Neve accounts for a lot of the character of it. So this is the verse.
Tickle in my temple, she carves out my eyes. Let's burn this body down. Dirt dissolves my fingertips. Her breath incarcerates me in her sound.
Right. So there's a very obvious double. Without the double, it sounds like this.
Dirt dissolves my fingertips. Her breath incarcerates me in her sound.
And you can actually hear like there's a little bit of room in there, which I wish weren't, but the compression brought that up. But the double definitely adds the chorusing effect to it, just to thicken it up.
It dissolves my fingertips, her breath incarcerates me.
But when you have everything, like the full mix, the double really helps thicken it out a bit. So here's without the double, and then I'll add it back in.
Dirt dissolves my fingertips, her breath incarcerates me in her sound.
So you don't really tell that they're doubled in the actual, in the verses, which is good, because I have them mixed down about 8 dB below the actual vocal, or below the lead, but it just does help thicken things out. And as far as processing goes, so everything's going to be, like all my doubles and leads, they're all going to be basically the same. But first, there's an EQ here. And yeah, there must have been, like, I must have used I often would use like the API UAD channel strip division. And so I probably ducked like the lows out of that already. And then that's probably where like that minor bit of compression came from. But it also saves my life later, because as you can see, like my CPU has been like peaking, and that's because this is a big session. And then I'm running an elevate at just at the end of it, just to kind of even everything out for the sake of this video. But without it, like the peak of the whole track would be like -3 or 4 dB. It's mixed low. But anyway, so I'm just dipping out some low mids, and then there's some additional compression coming from the arouser.
It dissolves my fingertips, her breath incarcerates me in her sound. Precious nymph, you are no other, cast a shadow of my mother, that Midwestern charm is in her bone.
So it's just doing, on average, like between 4 to 6 dB of gain reduction, just flattens things out just a little bit more. Then there's some Pro MB, and I'm using this to really do my heavy lifting. So this is going to be attenuating like my low mids, and like, so lows, low mids, and it's also going to be acting as my de-esser. So let's do each thing individually.
It dissolves my
So that is getting attenuated, that woofiness.
dissolves my
And that, like, you know, mid-range honk, that's getting attenuated a bit. And then this, and you can see it. So whenever it gets above that threshold, just clamps it down a bit. So the Pro MB is doing actually the heaviest lifting of anything on this vocal, and multiband compression in general is actually my favorite way to handle vocals, because once again, it's reactive to specific frequencies. And I did this song before I had, for instance, like Soothe, and Soothe does a lot of things like that, or the Baby Audio one, but it's, that's how I did it before, and it sounds really good. Then everything gets gone to a verse bus though, and on the verse bus, that's where like I take out just everything below 75 just to make sure, and then it goes through a VMR, and I'm just adding a little bit of high end with this FGA, which is the API, taking out a little bit of that 200. 200 for me is always just, there's a lot of it in my voice when I sing, so I always have to. And all my vocals are getting compressed together. 1176, UA, classic, sounds great. And then once again, there is another multiband compressor, and this is once again doing basically similar frequencies. I don't have the de-esser on it because I already de-essed the other things, but I'm just using these 3 separate bands to clean out just the mid-range and the low mids. So for instance, if we look at these, this should probably trigger all three of these individually.
How did I always sail alone? And on this tragic earth, the cynic found his tempo.
So you can see like this stuff.
How did I always sail alone?
That's being pulled down a bit. The low mids.
How did I always sail alone?
And the lows just a
How
touch.
did I always
There's not a ton there. So fortunately, I don't have to talk a ton about that, but that is effectively, that's what it's all doing. And the Pro MB, multi-band compression, huge. And also in this moment, and this is when we had that moment that was really mono at first. So again, this mono vocal.
How she has crawled into my soul.
Which gets filtered right there.
How she has crawled into my soul.
And I'm just automating the filter, the bypass of the filter itself. So I'm gonna play this, followed by the vocals right after.
How she has crawled into my soul.
Tiny and small.
And in my heart she bore a hole that's now her home. How did I always sail alone?
See, now nice and wide and lush. And if we say we just actually, solo our sends.
And in my heart she bore a hole that's now her home. How did I always sail alone?
And there's a nice long delay on there, right? So what is the story with that delay? And it's called, shockingly, long sent.
And in my heart she bore.
And long send is an echo boy. It's a quarter note echo boy. And it's just like studio tape, like basic default setting almost. But then afterwards, I have it going through a micro shift, and the micro shift is detuning the sides. So this little like simple mono, or basically like simple echo boy, the simple delay is now getting spread up, and it's nice and lush. And so putting a micro shift after your delay can sometimes be a really nice thing. My vocal reverb is a Lexicon. It's also UAD, the 224. This is really my favorite vocal reverb. 3.4 seconds, and it has an EQ after, and it's just taking out the low end and a little bit of the mid-range just to clean up anything that happens there. Let's talk about the chorus, because this is where it gets nice and big, and it's a similar, I mean, the EQ settings, all like the tech stuff is, very similar to what we did before.
Take my hand, cast away my doubts, lay me down again. Sing your quiet symphony to mend a broken.
So that's everything layered together, and like before, center, hard left, hard right. And there's some volume automation just to do some additional de-essing, for instance, like
Sing your quiet.
on sing, and I just dropped that S down by about 4 dB. That just cleans it up a little bit. And there are a few other moments that there are these ad libs, and these are like heavily affected.
Lay me down again. Take my hand. Sing your quiet symphony.
So the original effects are all the same, but I have this track control here, and this should be doing my panning automation. So that's flying the vocal around your head, and then that goes into an echo boy. And once again, nice long delay, and then into an eventide black hole just to space everything out. So that's a fun effect, and that's also a really cool moment in the song. Or right before a really cool moment in the song.
Sing your quiet symphony.
So I love that moment. And basically I cut everything out for that moment, and I made a bounce of 2 separate sections. And they are right here. They are dry. There is some EQ, but there is no reverb because I need these things to be as in your face as possible. And then this one. So I printed the guitar, I printed a vocal, and it must have been a reactor where I created a granular thing and I just automated, say, like, you know, basically the grain size and grain densities to do the but it's too, like, the speed of it is too fast to have done it in really in audio editing to do it that well. It was definitely done in reactor. So, but I love that moment. That's a really cool moment. And lastly, I have all these effects, and I mean, it's just a lot of interstitial things, like synth trails, for instance. And I don't know exactly where this came from at this point. It could have been from the Moog, could have been from any synth, but all I do know is that they were definitely reversed. And let's reverse it just back, just to see. But I mean, I don't know if this will tell us anything about it. Yep, no idea. But could have been the Moog, could have been the modular, could have been anything. But it went through a bunch of pedals. That's ultimately what gave it its sound. Then we have like these other like risers and stuff like that, which, you know, it's really just from like doing movie trailers that I get used to doing these big things. So it's just a lot of different layers. Like this is something really grained. It says Boingo Ultimate Grainer, which means I did it with Cecilia, which is C sound. Great sound. Dry Ice, which would have come from Dry Ice. Could have fooled me. And then just regular white noise. That gets layered in there. A China cymbal. Another China. So it's just all sorts of effects just to make, you know, those moments really, really heavy. And other than that, that's really the song. It's a lot of different elements. And it truly is it's an odd track. And I was honestly like very insecure about it when I first did it. It felt really important to me and I knew I had to write it, and I love the song, but because it was kind of, you know, bordering these two different grounds of, you know, here's like this warehouse techno thing, which is something like I'm very comfortable with. You know, I DJ'd for over a decade, but the folk side is obviously a lot more intimate, and just the idea of, you know, not only like, can I combine these things, but, you know, the awful, like, what are people gonna think? You know, like, here's me being all folky and emo and, you know, and not cold and mechanical. And, you know, it's an interesting thing to then combine these two worlds together. And you have this cold mechanical sound, but layered with a very, very heartfelt, soulful song on top of it. And it's one of my favorite songs on Dichotomy, bar none. And like I said, Quiet Symphony is without a doubt the most representative song of the title Dichotomy. So if you haven't heard Quiet Symphony before, I mean, I can't imagine you wouldn't have, because you wouldn't have sat through this entire video. It's been long, but there's a lot going on here. It's all handcrafted. It's all played. And it's a really personal song. So I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you learned something from this. So until then, signing out.